The price of doing business went up, and signing this free agent would be a mistake for the Texans. Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans, and let's talk about big Christian Wilkins, the free agent to be from the Miami Dolphins at defensive tackle. The Texans can't sign this guy. And I was in favor of the idea, and I know he's a fan favorite of a lot of people. I see it in the comment section here on YouTube. I see it on social media. Christian Wilkins. He's a very nice player. But the cost of doing business at the defensive tackle spot just went up, and Wilkins is not going to be worth the money. You look at this news from Friday afternoon, and Justin Madubuike, who is a better player than Christian Wilkins, got a huge contract. 4 years, $98 million for Madubuike, who was a second-team All-Pro and had 13 sacks this past season and will play next year at the age of 27 for the Baltimore Ravens. That's a big deal for Madubuike, and it would have been a bigger deal had he hit free agency. Now, most of the prognosticators when it comes to contracts believe that Wilkins is going to make even more than Madubuike, and that would be a foolish investment for the Houston Texans. $25 million a year for Christian Wilkins would be a terrible investment and a horrible signing for the Texans. Not that Wilkins isn't a solid player. He is. He's a really solid player, and he's coming off of his best year in the NFL. He had 9 sacks on the season, and he helped steady a Miami Dolphins defensive line in front seven that was constantly rotating pass rushers due to injury. But it's tough to see how Christian Wilkins gets anywhere close to $25 million a year worth of value. This is a guy that, yes, he had 9 sacks this season. Coming into the season on his career, he had 11.5 sacks. So yes, the sack numbers jumped up. The pass rushing prowess got more impressive from Christian Wilkins. But I caution you to go sort of inside the numbers here with Christian Wilkins. I mentioned the 9 sacks. Let's go through the teams that he had those 9 sacks against. He had a sack against the New England Patriots. He had a half a sack against the Giants. He had 2 sacks against the Carolina Panthers, another sack against the Patriots, 2 sacks against the Jets, a sack against the Tennessee Titans, a half a sack against the Jets. That's 8 of his 9 sacks on the season against horrible offensive line play. Now look, guys produce against poor offensive lines when it comes to defensive linemen. That's something that happens. But if you're betting on the pass rushing prowess being there, it's hard to see how that is something that's going to be consistent, and that is something that is going to get even better than it was this past year for Christian Wilkins. Sure, adding some good teammates around him, a little bit better defense, a better defensive scheme, that could make him a better player. But if he was, say, 2 sacks better on the season, that's still not a $25 million a year player. The investment in Wilkins at that number keeps the Houston Texans from doing everything that they need to do in free agency ahead of the draft. Okay? In free agency, they've got to find some linebackers, possibly a starter, but certainly some depth. They've got to find a starting cornerback, or at the very least, some significant depth when it comes to the cornerback spot. You sign Christian Wilkins, you're probably not spending a whole bunch of money at the defensive end spot, and the Texans have just a handful of options at defensive end on their roster right now. That's Majai Sanders to play opposite Will Anderson, or Dylan Horton should he return and play football for this team. So you've got a defensive end issue that you've got to solve as well. Again, Wilkins is a solid player, and at the right number, I'd be very interested in Christian Wilkins being on the Texans, but more money than Justin Madubuike is not the right number. Find a stopgap veteran that can play, be a part of the rotation with the Texans defensive line. Hopefully you can add another guy come draft time. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, we'll just draft one when the draft gets here, because you don't know if one of these big-time defensive tackles is going to be there, but the Texans rotate their defensive linemen. They use 7-8 guys on any given week. So investing $25 million in one guy and taking away from the overall investment that you could make in this defense, it's not sound decision-making. $25 million might be Jonathan Grenard and Panthers free agent linebacker Frankie Louvu. I would take both of those players at a combined $25 million over Christian Wilkins, who's not an elite football player. Like, if we're talking about $25 million, $27 million, $28 million for a guy like Chris Jones, for a guy like Aaron Donald, it's a pretty easy sell for me. Pay the man. Chris Jones isn't likely to be available. The Chiefs are set to keep him. Aaron Donald's not available. Big-time defensive tackles get paid. Wilkins isn't one of those guys. He's never been one of those guys. He's a role player in a piece, and he can be an excellent role player within a defense, but you don't need to pay a role player $25 million. Okay? He's not ever going to be a star. He's not ever going to be a stud for you. You've got a budding star at end in Will Anderson. Get him a defensive end running mate with some of this free agency money. Find a veteran that can start right away next to Malik Collins. You've got to add some depth at defensive tackle as well, because there's not a lot of defensive tackle options on the roster right now. You've got to add some guys at linebacker, maybe starters, maybe depth pieces, corner. You'd love to add a safety as well with some depth. And there's so many different ways you could spend the money. I'm out on spending this money on Christian Wilkins. It doesn't make sense. Plus, there are guys that are fairly productive that aren't going to cost anything close to Christian Wilkins at the defensive tackle spot. Heck, I'd bring back Sheldon Rankins at basically what he made last year, which was $10 million, before I'd even think about paying Christian Wilkins. A guy like Justin Jones from the Chicago Bears, who's 28 years old this upcoming season. I'd pay him a little bit of money before I'd pay Christian Wilkins. By the way, Wilkins is going to be 29 years old when he hits this first year of the contract. So I'm not saying that the Texans shouldn't spend money. Absolutely spend the money. You just can't spend it on Christian Wilkins. It ties up too much money when you have too many things to use it on. And I'd be very concerned about the decision-making process of the DeMeco Ryans, Nick Caserio tandem if they made this investment. They are not a Christian Wilkins away. Now, I know the San Francisco 49ers had all this money dumped into their defense already, and then last offseason they went and dumped a whole bunch more money into Javon Hargrave in free agency. They were thinking they were only a Javon Hargrave away, and they were pretty darn close to right. They needed Hargrave over the course of the season because some of the other guys that they had at the defensive tackle spot had not panned out. Javon Kinlaw is a free agent. He's one of the names that hadn't panned out to that level. And so they needed that investment. There was almost everything else was taken care of for the 49ers. They had an expensive running back. They had a bunch of wide receivers. They had a tight end. The offensive line was in solid state. They had Nick Bosa out there as a pass rusher. They had some solid players at linebacker, safety, corner as well. Like, the Texans have too many holes to make this investment. I understand it's exciting, but he's not an elite player. He's not going to be an elite player, and you can't pay guys who aren't going to be elite to be a solid player on your team. You can't pay them elite money just to be solid, and that's where Christian Wilkins falls. I hope somebody pays him, but I just don't hope that's the Houston Texans. It'd be a foolish investment. What say you? You got some pushback for me? You feel like I'm wrong? Let me know in the comment section down below on your way down there. Throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And, of course, the comment section is always live. We love to hear from you there. So much more coming up here on the channel. Free agency right around the corner. We'll break down moves that the Texans make. We'll have more preview stuff for you as it gets closer. You don't want to miss any of it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you're not a big Christian Wilkins fan. I'm sorry I tore your guy down here. I'm rooting for him to get a lot of money, just not from the Houston Texans. I can't wait until we talk some more free agency and talk about the Texans again soon.